our channel, Refuge of Sinners. Today we have Dr. David Cartland. Dr. Cartland is a fully qualified UK doctor and GP. He's completed the Bachelor of Medicine and Bachelor of Surgery and also has a first-class honours degree in biomedical science, including a year of specialist immunology and microbiology virology training, including statistical analysis. Between his two degrees, Dr. Cartland worked for a year in the angiogenesis research group at the University of Birmingham, and he's a published author in angiogenesis research. He's a general practitioner with some 15 years' experience. Welcome, Dr. Cartland. How are you?
No, thank you for having me. I'm very well, thank you. Enjoying the ride, as it were. And thank you for the nice introduction. It sounds like you're the description of the perfect anti-vaxxer conspiracy theorist.
Yes, doesn't it? Dr. Cartland, why did you decide to become a doctor?
I became a doctor, like hopefully most of my colleagues, to help people, to use my knowledge and skills. God blessed me with a brain, an academic ability, and I wanted to use that to understand the human body, how it works, how it functions, the physiology, pathophysiology, when it goes wrong, what you can do about it. And the reason I became the sort of speciality doctor that I became, which was a family doctor, a general practitioner, I'm not sure what you call them in Australia.
Practitioner. In Australia, we say general practitioner, yeah.
I'm doing lots of little world interviews at the minute on where they call football, soccer, and all the rest of it in different places. But yeah, so I became a family doctor because, the joy of kind of what appealed to me was a cradle to grave thing. That was always taught to me. People call it old school GP in inverted commas. An old school GP literally was a GP that I signed up to be, which was, getting to know families, social circumstances. It's more subtle things around the nuances of the human body and how it interacts with psychology and sociology and how it fits into families. So literally managing patients from their birth to their death. Sadly, it disappointed me in that respect, but we may come to that later on in the interview. But yeah, that was a hope, and I have a holistic approach to people's health. When you become a GP, the gold standard exit exam teaches you this standard of, that exactly what I've just mentioned, but on top of that, what we call the ideas, concerns and expectations of the patient. So when they enter your room, you consider everything from their perspective, what they expect from the consult, what their concerns are. It may be that the concern is unfounded, like I've got a headache, I think I've got a brain tumour, but you explore why they've come to that conclusion. And then also, like I said, but consider everything from the biopsychosocial, the three aspects of a person presenting, for example, something like a bad back. Bad backs, some doctors now just throw painkillers, but they don't look at the root cause analysis, which is what's the actual cause of the bad back biologically, but actually the impact that has on that person's work life as a carer, their interactions with their children even. So that's a sort of model doctor. And it's impossible to do that, unfortunately, in the UK NHS system nowadays, because you get 10 minutes from start to finish, calling the patient in to kicking them out at the end. So 10 minutes included, and that's your notes and all the housekeeping involved too. So if you can, some people obviously bring 3 or 4 problems to the party because they've had to wait for some amount of months to get to you, an actual human doctor, rather than a telephone call. But so sadly disappointed how it's all turned out, really. 15 years. And I always describe my career as a kind of Titanic after the iceberg has hit. And the last 15 years has been that whole bit afterwards. It's just kind of gone downhill fast I can't provide the care that I want to now. It's impossible. And when you protest about it and ask and point out safety concerns and issues that just clinical risks, for example, it's encouraged in the NHS, and we'll probably come on to that later on in the interview, that we're encouraged to flag up these concerns, and under the guise of these wonderful banners of whistleblowing rights, for example, and in the UK they've coined it a new phrase of freedom to speak up guardianship. So very much encouragement. If you see something that's not safe or not ethical, speak up, until you do. And when you do, you can pick up your P45 at the front door as you leave. So it really is a shame that that's a culture, and we've seen that in the COVID crisis, and I'm sure we'll talk about that. The doctors and nurses that are contacting me now, in their hundreds and hundreds, are literally petrified to speak out. So how we've gone from an open culture of whistleblowing and safe, learning culture of freedom to speak up guardianship, to people petrified to say, look, I saw a miscarriage in a vaccinated woman, it's blatantly to do with the vaccine. I'm seeing carnage on my obstetric ward, my oncology ward, hematology ward. and in their masses just silent and conforming. And that's a conundrum that I'm being asked left, right, and centre. Well, how do we get these people to speak out? Well, I don't know the answer to that, but they've got to find some courage from somewhere.
Yeah, I will get to that. I actually want to ask you first to tell us how did you first notice, or why did you first get concerns about these COVID vaccines? What is it that you saw initially? If you can think back to the beginning, probably 2021, when were you first aware that there was something wrong?
My first year of it was an observational year. So I worked in two locations in the UK. One was in the Midlands at a massive surgery. And I remember when it first came out, I saw the same news propaganda that everyone else did. So we were kind of going into work with absolutely no knowledge, flicking on the TV in the UK, and you've got people dropping down in the streets, in Bergamo in Italy. You've got people dropping down in Wuhan, all these kind of mocked up scenarios. And scared the hell out of us all. And I remember I was told I wasn't allowed to work actually during the pandemic because I had asthma. I said work from home from the outset. The email came out, pandemic declared, anyone with any respiratory comorbidity stay at home. I remember signing a waiver to fight on the front line, whatever this is. I signed up to an oath and I'll be there on the front line. So I remember signing that waiver. If you die of COVID, then it's not on your health centre's litigation. And in the other direction,
Can I just interrupt you there? Are you saying that they asked you to work from home because you have asthma, but you signed a waiver saying, no, I'm going in?
Yeah, that's
Okay.
what happened with me. But as I was walking in the building, there were a lot of doctors walking out the other way, claiming that they'd had asthma in 2010 or some dusty inhaler from 2022 that they'd found. And anyway, that's how it was. I remember working in this massive complex. It's a big federation, 30,000 patients, I think, had on their list, and sat around waiting for the ruck of deadly virus patients coming in, and nothing. And it's the most quiet 6 months of my career. TikTok dances were going on in the building. These things were happening. They had plenty of time on their hands. I remember it was me and another doctor most days. And you were seeing about a third of the footfall. And even then, we were almost kind of going out with flyers in the street asking patients to come and see us. But ultimately, that was my experience in the Midlands. And actually, at that time, I was asked by a politician, a local MP, that was interested in helping the heroes of the NHS. So I was offered the opportunity to go to the local supermarkets and go to the local hospital with food that had been donated from fast food restaurants, and supermarket donations to staff rooms and common rooms, and the on-call room, for example. And I was getting to see what was going on, what I now call behind enemy lines, because I was going into A&E departments and ITUs and the COVID wards, and just looking around and seeing not only how empty it was and how the staff were pretty much, they're filing the nails. And, I'm not saying that was that all the time, but it was just not what you'd expect entering a hospital at a point of the peak of a pandemic. The roads were silent and so were the hospitals. I call it the England match effect. So in the UK, when England played football, people park their symptoms for a few hours and then suddenly pile into the A&E department a few hours after. I was an A&E doctor before I was a GP, by the way. So that was it. And so anyway, asked a few questions, being told the patients in with the COVID ward were patients who were incidentally positive with COVID. So they'd gone in with a fractured neck of femur, or they'd gone in with urinary tract infection off legs, and they'd be, up the nose, positive test. And they were then obviously classed as unvaccinated COVID positive patients with a neck of femur fracture omitted from the history. And so that's where the COVID wards were full from unvaccinated patients. And anyway, I took my adventure at that point down. We were, like I said, before we started recording, I was on my way to Australia. The rules changed, decided to come down to Cornwall. And continued my observational exercises, just watching and listening and learning. There was no information coming in from any sort of authoritative source about how do we treat this COVID, and essentially it came down to, is the patient breathless or hypoxic? If you did, you'd send them to hospital to face a hazmat suit wearing individual to be ventilated. And, you've probably seen the COVID protocols. They're pretty scary stuff. And originally, I'll come to my friend after the reason I took the vaccine, because as you probably know, I took 2 vaccines. We'll get to that. But essentially, we weren't being told. I was starting to look around studies with my science background, saying, surely there must be something here. Started to do some initial research about ivermectin, vitamin D, steroids. And essentially, it never really crossed my mind, even when the vaccine rollout came out, if I'm honest with you, to question it. Because again, at medical school, it's very different to the scientific study that you do. Your scientific study is around analysis and, critical appraisal, question everything. Whereas in medical school, there was this didactic, follow the crowd mentality. This is the science. These are the medicines you use for this condition, and these are the symptoms of these conditions. It's very much tick box algorithmic learning, and it was very, very different to the science that I did. And so, what I noticed was at that point, I'd been sort of, my scientific background had been beaten out of me into this kind of follow the rules. And what we were told at medical school was don't touch don't question jabs. The only vaccine message I ever had in 4 years of medical school, as I did an accelerated program, was don't touch vaccines with a barge pole. They are safe, they're effective, and if you speak out against them, you're going to be Dr. Andrew Wakefield. And that was it. It was a kind of a veiled threat. Interestingly, we had no lectures on nutrition or holistic medicine and even immunology. It was very, very basic level, which is how they've managed to hoodwink doctors into vaccinating people who've recovered from an infection, for example. And so, the first jab came out. I was told it was a vaccine, it was safe and effective, like the rest of the public. And literally, my only defense of doctors is, we, on a day-to-day basis, outside of those initial sort of 6 to 8 months, is general practice is very busy. You start your day at 8 o'clock, you leave at 6, and you have 10-minute intervals 40 times a day. Your lunch break is a home visit or two, and you eat your lunch while you're driving out to them. So I think there's that deliberate keep the doctor busy so that they don't question and look outside. You don't feel like after that barrage of a day to pull out the Lancet Journal or the New England Journal of Medicine and sort of peruse the government documents and data. So easy meat, really, in terms of the doctors in order to perpetrate this, number one. And even vaccine number two.
Sorry, do you mind if I just interrupt just there? Because you've mentioned that twice now. I don't understand how this 10-minute thing happened. Are all your GPs in England, because I'm obviously speaking from Australia, but we've got an international audience, are all your GPs in England under this NHS system? They don't have any way of being in a private practice where they can have a half-hour consult, or even, I've had a 1-hour consult with a GP before here.
The NHS system is invariably 10-minute appointments. Some are starting to succumb to the fact that 10 minutes is a dangerous amount of time. It's been my whole career. I've been a GP since I was looking at my certificate now, 2014. Yeah. So all through that, it was 10 minutes. And if you question the 10 minutes, you were not resilient enough. And only this last week, when I've resigned for the second time now, retired from the NHS, I was told, you know what you signed up for. I was just saying, look, I've had a guy come in today with chest pain. We had to call an ambulance. He was waiting for an ambulance. It was taking 4 hours to come in. Had a patient that came in with mental health saying that they were going to murder somebody. Rang the police. Police said, call an ambulance. Ambulance said, call the police. Even at the basic level, in 10 minutes, it's ridiculous. You can call a little old dear in from the waiting room, and by the time she's heard you, after you've called her name 3 times, she's gathering a handbag and a Zimmer frame and, clumps her way into your room. That's the 10 minutes gone before she pulls out a little list with her quivering hands and tells you about her weight loss and her chest pains and her forgetfulness and some social issues. And based on what I said at the beginning about why I became a GP, it's just impossible. And then you go back to your practice manager and say, 10 minutes really? Is this okay? Would you be going 10 minutes to 10? And you do that 20 times a morning. And then they're pinging you tasks and you just sign that. Can you just look at this ECG? Knock on the door from a nurse practitioner saying, oh, I've looked in this area. Can you give me your opinion on this case? Tell you the whole spiel and then put your name all over their notes in defense of their own practice. So it's a complete mess. It's completely unsafe. And hence I took the decision only this Monday just gone to quit. I can't be in that system. And there are systems of private practice. This is what I'm looking at, not just within allopathic medicine, but in holistic medicine, naturopathic, functional medicine, and that's where my skill set's going to be. I'm reading books at the moment about nutrition and paleo-ketogenic diets, and the book next to me right now is Ecological Medicine by an absolute hero called Sarah Myhill, who again has spoken out in the UK, exemplary record, but he's been suspended for promoting things like vitamin C and ivermectin, for example, and had a name dragged through the tabloids here for prescribing horse paste to a patient and all the rest of it. And I look forward to that, and I'm sure we'll talk about the GMC stuff. But going back to my awakening, it came, you asked at the start about what was my eureka moment, really, and it was first vaccine came in, second vaccine came in, nothing really came on my radar. I didn't question it. I put my hands up and said I didn't even know it was mRNA, if I'm honest with you. I took the first jab because I was told my friend died of COVID, my best friend in the world, Emma. contacted me 2 weeks before her death saying she couldn't breathe, had a cough. She looked a bit blue around the edges when she FaceTimed me. I said, you need to go to the doctors. Next morning, I wake up to a message. She's got a hood over her head. And I'm being told by the nurse, say bye to your friend. This might be the last time you see her. And I was told, at the end of that 2-week debacle, she died of COVID-19, and it was plastered all over the tabloids. Emma dies of COVID-19. And to cut a long story short, no, she didn't. There was every manner of iatrogenic harm to that wonderful person, and I'll never forgive the medical profession for that. So that was a personal hit for me. And so I knew no better. I thought maybe I've got it wrong. Maybe these empty A&Es, TikTok dancing nurses in COVID ITUs and what I was seeing in primary care maybe just be me being in the wrong arena, in the primary care setting, and maybe there are these dying people that the BBC were promoting. And so I ran down the vaccine centre, took the jab without much thought with my wife. And the next 3 days I was in bed with real strange symptoms, like odd symptoms, like my brain was being shook, electric shocks down my spine and my arms. And it lasted 3 days, got better, never really thought much of it. Just thought, every time I had the flu jab, I always became unwell back in the day, which I've never had since, by the way. And so the second one came, they brought the second one out, and personally declined it. I just thought I felt so bad after that first one. I'm just going to decline it simply on the basis of, every time I get the flu jab, I get the flu-like illness. When I had the COVID jab, I was in bed for 3 days, incapacitated. I'm a young man. I'm not going to be suffering with this. I've got no comorbidities apart from the mild asthma, really, from the past, exercise-induced, really. And so the second jab, it was a coercion. It was literally jab. You need to come and have your jab, doctor. Doctor, your jab. You need to have a jab. And just every day it was an incessant. You need to have a jab. You need to have it. You're going to get sacked. That was the final straw. They sacked the carers in the UK. Yeah. And so we knew they meant business. They weren't just messing around. It wasn't just empty threats. And then they came to us, the doctors, and it wasn't just doctors. They were receptionists, non-patient facing people that were going to be sacked for not having their second jab. And I succumbed to it. I did. I was selfish, and I thought, sod it. It's my career, my family, my house. We just got a mortgage in Cornwall, massive mortgage. And I need to look after that as well. I got 4 children. And the kind of that took over my thinking. And they got me on a bad day. I was working on a really busy day. It was about 2:00. I'd seen about 32, 33 patients at 10-minute intervals. And I just succumbed to it. I thought, sod it, let's do it. Just give it me. I won't repeat exactly the words that I said when I received it, but it was against my wishes, let's say, and that was made clear to the vaccinator. And so that was it. And I hadn't really seen in my clinical arena anything that suggested that those 2 jabs had caused anything more than transient side effects at that point. So swollen arms or, some weird reactive arthritis, some odd rashes maybe at worst. But when that booster came out, so after I'd had that second jab, no sooner I'd had that second jab, they came after me for a third one. They literally, it was 2 days after or 3 days after saying, we're going to have to line you up for the third. And I said, that's very odd. I've tried to decline this as much as possible. How many is it going to take? And that's when the research started. That's when I was like, well, what is this stuff? They're incessantly, is that incessantness and the intent to jab every single person? And you were seeing countries making really ridiculous rules, like locking people down and bizarre stuff that was so anti-science. And so after that booster went in for me, I declined it at that point. They never came anywhere near me because I told them in no uncertain terms never to come and ask me for a COVID jab again. It was harassment. And at that point, the booster went in. And shortly after the booster, the day after the booster started rolling in, there was that correlation between people having the vaccine and developing, and I mean every sort of side effect. They were coming in with the usual swollen arm, but mainly autoimmune mediated things, blood clots, odd atypical chest pains in young people. In the weeks coming on after that, I was seeing people with a lot more kind of stories that would lean into, is this potential cancer? But they were so young. They had cancer sort of symptoms. So I was doing a lot more fast track referrals for cancer. And it really came to, my actual eureka moment came to a particular day where I'd seen that a patient in the 40s had died. And I read the death certificate. And the death certificate said AstraZeneca, COVID-19 after post-mortem caused this lady's death in her early 40s. And vaccine-induced thrombocytic thrombocytopenia. The very same week, I received personally a death certificate for a 44-year-old, I think she was, who died of COVID-19 with the exact same words on the death certificate: AstraZeneca, COVID-19, VIT, and the post-mortem was horrendous, clots in every single blood vessel. And that's I started to make that correlation then between AstraZeneca and the clots, because that same day as that second death certificate came in, We got a call from our local hospital, Derriford, it's called. It's our neurosurgical centre. Rang us up. I was the duty doctor and said, we've got a patient of yours, 41's collapsed. He's had a fit and he's got a cerebral venous thrombosis, so that's almost like a DVT of the brain.
Yeah.
And I remember looking at his notes with this death certificate fresh in my mind and said, look, I looked how many jabs he'd had, if he'd had any, and he'd had that jab, the first jab, only the first jab the day before. And I said to the consultant, I said, look, could this be related to the AstraZeneca? We've had 2 patients die this last week or so of the AstraZeneca jab. And he huffed at me. And that's the first time in my life I was called an anti-vaxxer. He said, oh, Dr. Carton, you're not one of those anti-vaxxers, are you? I said, no, I'm just saying that he had the jab yesterday and today's with you having a cerebral venous thrombosis. And at that point, I realised the gaslighting that was going to ensue, because I asked him what he thought what the cause of the clot was, and he said it was because of his maxillary inflammation. So he'd got some inflammation in his sinuses. I mean, I'd spoke to the guy afterwards, and I asked him what he thought about that. He said, well, they're trying to pin it on my sinus inflammation. Doctor, I've never sneezed in my life. I've never had any sort of upper respiratory tract infection for years, and they're trying to say I've got a brain clot. I don't understand, doctor. What are you saying? And I said, well, I think it could be the vaccine. And I raised this with my bosses, and my bosses were distinctly uninterested. And went on that very weekend to vaccinate people with the jab that had just killed 2 women in their 40s, and a 41-year-old man was having a cerebral venous thrombosis. I think the words used were, well, the show must go on. The show must go on. I mean, how sick is that? Or what do you want me to do about it? If I was doling out drugs and people were collapsing, I'd expect the drug to be stopped pending urgent investigation. This was early days. This was very early on after the booster had gone in.
Okay, a couple of questions. Can you remember what month of the year? I'm assuming this is 2021. Is this 2021? Can you remember sort of?
It would have been 2021, but given the last 3 years, the whole of the timeline has blurred somewhat. So I'm not going to commit to a time, but it was very early on. It was before I'd had my second jab, because I'd seen that, and that was one of the reasons I didn't want my second jab. I actually left that surgery for that reason, as well as the fact that this surgery were asking me to go and visit oncology patients whilst I was working in the surgery with a DNV bug. So that just shows the level of, I rang in one day and I said, I'm sick. I've got diarrhea, vomiting. They begged me to come in and work from a telephone. And the boss said to me, can you go and visit an oncology patient that was literally 2 minutes away from where this doctor was working in the remote clinic? Yeah. And bearing in mind, everyone was washing their hands left, right, and centre, and wearing every bit of PPE they could find. I was being told to go and visit an oncology patient to give an injection for anti-sickness whilst having an active gastroenteritis. And I refused to.
Right, Dr. Carlin, that's very contagious, gastroenteritis.
Absolutely. Well, you're not supposed to be at work really for 48 hours after your last symptom, and they were telling me to go and visit an oncology patient. And I remember the doctor who asked me to do it, he flat refused. I flat refused. He then did the visit after much protestation by me. He got several people to say, Dr. Cartman, you need to go and do this visit. I said, I've got DMV. I'm not going to see him. Anyway, the long and short of it was he came to the surgery with the practice manager. I was in the middle of a phone call. He burst in, got in my face, physically threatened me, said that he paid my wages. And, next time I ask him to do something, you do it, because I pay for your wages. You work for me. And he walked out. So I resigned that day and walked to the next practice. I went back to a practice I'd previously resigned from, actually. And then all the fun came. I actually resigned that practice, the next one that I moved on to, because we'd reached a bit of some common ground on the fact that they were vaccinating, or they were going for younger and younger cohorts. And at the particular time, they were going for the 12 to 17-year-olds. And so I was still working at this surgery in Cornwall. The 17 to 12-year-old cohort were next for the jab. And I said, look, can we have a conversation? I was seeing some pretty alarming stuff here about the myocarditis data, people getting pericarditis and people dropping in the field of playing sports. Firstly, what is the rationale here for giving it to such a young, healthy cohort? The average age of death from COVID is 82. It adds years to your life, actually. I think it's 84 if you've had COVID. Apparently it goes up. And so why are we giving it to these young people? And what next after the 12-year-olds? And I remember I was in a coffee room setting, and 5 or 6 of them got up, and I was holding a document, I think, from the Lancet, saying, they were quoting the BBC radio at me, and I was saying, well, this is a published peer-reviewed journal on the myocarditis data. I can't remember what it said, but it was pretty damning at the time. And I remember one of the guys pushed me as he walked out there. I don't want to listen to your conspiracy theories. And I was like, okay. Anyway, the room was emptied, and there were about 3 or 4 people left at the end of it. And they all agreed with me. And they all agreed. They said, we're not going to vaccinate 12 to 17-year-olds under our roof, and we're not going to vaccinate our own children. And so that was fine. We'd reached a bit of a common ground. I thought, wow, that's quite, and these were senior people, not just the salaried doctors and the physios, etc. Very next day on the website, the website for the surgery, they're advertising the 12 to 17-year-old vaccine rollout for the surgery down the road, sending our staff down to man it,
Right.
as well as appealing for volunteers to go and give the jabs as well.
Yeah.
And so I'm seeing that even now, doctors who are refusing the jab, which is absolutely the right thing to do, but still administering them to their patients and still giving them to children and pregnant women. So that's still going on in 2024. That's why I've left my job in January at the local surgery that I've been working at. But going right back in time, I resigned the next day. I put a public resignation saying, you're good people, but you need to realise you're doing harm to your patients. I quit.
Yeah.
From that day, I wrote an article called Breaking the Silence, which was asking some basic questions of the science, the testing, the whole shebang of what was going on at the time, just basic stuff for layman's terms, really. And it went out, it went viral. And then the fun and games began. The interviews were being picked up and started to speak out. And I offered the BBC to speak to them. I offered Radio 4 to speak to me, ITV to speak to me, emails to all these different. They didn't want me near. They didn't want me near. I'd offered doctors debates, local doctors, national doctors. Privately, through social media, no debate, and that was really quite sinister. The lack of debate, considering the credentials you read out at the start of the interview, at least give me the time of day. And I can empty a room now by going into it. If I go in for coffee and I say, guys, can we just talk about the rollout of the COVID jab? And it empties. It's like rats to the sewer.
Yeah.
They've got no data, honestly. It's not even funny. Some even now don't even know in 2023, 24 that it's mRNA, that it's got any sort of genetic immunomodulatory activity whatsoever. They don't know the basics. I asked the person who jabbed me, my first jab, in a chance meeting we had at a surgery, probably a couple of years ago now. And she didn't know. She didn't know. She didn't want to know what the Pfizer documents were. She didn't know anything about emergency use authorization. She didn't know that Pfizer had planned to lock their clinical data up for a matter of years, 75 years, I think it was. And this was news to them even now. But you say that, it does sound audacious, doesn't it? Why would a pharmaceutical company offer to hide their data from their clinical trials for 75 years? It just doesn't make sense. None of it does. And this is why doctors are struggling with this, because who would be perpetrating this? Who would be conducting this whole plan that we're seeing play out in front of us? And the lockstep, the coordination, and then the silence, the coordinated silence, and no one wants to speak up. It really is quite sinister and dark. And it's a spiritual darkness going around at the moment.
Yeah, it is really dark, but I think the doctors, I think you brought it up earlier that you've got the science degree and the medicine degree. But if a lot of those general practitioners or family doctors in England only have a medical degree, you're concerned that they're not learnt to think critically and to ask questions. They're just taught to follow protocols. So
yeah, and that's first-hand experience. I've been in the lecture theatre. You'll sit there. It's the actual the curriculum in the medical school is you sit and do lectures for 2 or 3 years, whichever degree program you do. And I did it in 1 year because I did this condensed postgraduate because I've got the previous science degree. But then you're let loose in the wards then, and that's when again, poor standard of learning in a way. It's kind of like follow the doctor around and just absorb and listen and copy them, really. And we're seeing that with the latest approach to UK healthcare, where we've got people following doctors around, doctors who've done proper 10 years of training, and the postgraduate experience that you have in hospitals for 5 years, foundation program we call it in the UK. But you've got these people popping up now with 1-year diplomas and 2-year diplomas and add-on degrees to banking degrees, and they're popping up in hospitals with stethoscopes around the neck. And I don't think the public are being told that they are not doctors. You've got physicians associates, nurse practitioners, ACPs, ENPs. I've forgot the acronyms, are so many now. And they're trying to get bums on seats to create an illusion. And these were the people that were manning the vaccine centres. With respect, you weren't seeing the doctors. The doctors weren't administering the jabs on the whole. It was volunteers and very, very junior members of what I call them doctors. It's not very respectful. I just mean they're not doctors. But they've not done the same training. They haven't got the same critical. So it's not even just the doctors that are not critically thinking. You've got these people that are just they cause more work. They cause more work than they do alleviate work, and it makes my work harder because they take the easy stuff. They've got the bad back and the sore ear and the sore throat, and I've got complexity, and that 10 minutes has got a whole lot worse for me because the easy stuff gets plucked out. But yeah, they don't introduce themselves on the whole as who they are.
no.
They'll just say, "Hi, Mrs. Jones, sit down," and there's a presumption from Doris, the 85-year-old who's walked in, that this is a doctor. It's not a doctor, no. They're not a doctor. I mean, I'd say they're outnumbering doctors now because doctors have had enough of it all. You've got there's a lot of guilt at the moment in the profession, and the people are dropping their sessions, they're becoming locums and private doctors and retiring early. That's the latest. And some are off sick now for obvious reasons and retiring on ill health grounds. So, yeah, there's a trend where, there's an illusion that the practices staff are complete because you've got bodies on seats, but they're not doctors at the end of the day, and they need to start introducing themselves to start with, so people know. And their knowledge base isn't brilliant. I don't mind saying that. The knowledge base is very basic. They sit in with me and watch me do my consulting, and you throw them a curveball, they just don't. They just don't know. They just don't know. If the patient's got a urine infection, for example, then they say, "Oh, they're pregnant." And they're like, "Oh, it's like a rabbit in a headlights." They just can't think that, still do the same history, still follow protocol, dip the way. They don't know the nuances of, I've been asked to show, qualified physicians associates how to do an abdominal examination after they've qualified. And, somebody said, I've looked in this chap's ear. I can't really see what's causing their pain. And you're looking with an otoscope and it's impacted earwax. And there's all sorts of litigation going on against physicians associates in the UK now because there's all sorts of pandemonium happening where the patients are going in and they're going in with a chest pain and they're just completely going off on a tangent, telling them it's a sore throat, give them some antibiotics, and they're actually having chest pain radiating into their throat and dropping down dead, for example. So it's just don't want to be too hard on them, but it is what it is. You've got to call these things out. They're safety concerns at the end of the day. They're not doctors, and even in my own practice, I've seen lots of concerning things going on with them. But hey,
that's another complication. I wanted to ask you, one of the things I know I've heard you talk about is that there was a nursing home early in the rollout of the vaccines. There was a nursing home opposite, you must have been opposite your practice. And
yeah, it's opposite practice, yeah.
Something really concerning happened when the vaccine rollout started in the nursing home. Do you want to, because I know this has happened in other parts of the world, tell people what happened at the nursing home.
Well, this isn't the only nursing home it happened at. I worked at several surgeries locally as well, so I knew that this trend was happening, a venous thromboembolism. And so, they'd do a rollout, they'd hit all these old dears in the nursing home at the same time. They'd go around, well, half of them didn't eat. I mean, talk about informed consent. They were going around giving patients in their last hours of life with dementia or cancer the vaccine. Palliative patients. I mean, what on earth is that all about? They were going around to these dementia patients and giving them their latest booster. I can't remember which one, whether it's the second or third, but there were about eight or nine, I think it was, within a very small community. I think there were about 40, 45 people in this nursing home. And I mean, that's a very noticeable safety signal if suddenly all these octogenarians are suddenly getting DVTs and PEs and chest pains within a few hours, minutes, weeks of the vaccine, and no one suspects the vaccine. And that's been the whole headline, really, of this. The vaccine is never, ever in the equation, never part of the differential diagnosis.
Okay, there have been some other UK doctors that have been suspended for speaking out. I know Dr. Ahmed Malik, orthopedic surgeon. So, but what I wanted to ask is, apart from obviously Dr. Malik, who is speaking out, and yourself, are there many other UK doctors speaking out at the moment against the vaccine?
Well, yeah, I just want to pay homage to those who fell before me, actually, at this point. So, number one, I'd say, yeah, Ahmad has actually given up his license by choice after being suspended, bless him, from his 3 private practices. That he was, he's an exemplary doctor, a gentleman, in fact. And even so, he's had to give up his license because he's seen what's happening to me, and he's seen what's happened to those that went before us, who are the likes of Sarah Myhill. These people have all got exemplary records. Sarah Myhill, Anne Doherty, Jane Donegan. My apologies if I forget any. Mohammed Adil, Sam White, et al. I'll say for now, just because I'm on the spot to remember those. But these guys have all been suspended. They've had to face GMC regulation, as I'm about to do in October, to be struck off in October. That's my future. And so people, what I would say is there are lots and lots of awake doctors. I would say in the thousands in the UK, thousands easily. And they're in their WhatsApp groups, and they're in the Telegram groups, and they're in the Facebook groups, and they're passing information and declaring how disgrace it all is, and and they're silent. It's like you've just said, your perspective is there's like 2 doctors speaking in the UK. There is another one. I'm going to name him, actually, Dr. Tim Kelly. He's a guy who has spoke out early on, was reprimanded, has just done a couple of interviews lately on various radio stations, and straight away he's had a little knock on the door by his boss saying, "Can we have a quick chin wag?" So I don't know what the outcome of that is, but there's that silent agreement that you can't speak out. Even every single day I get hundreds of messages of similar cases that really keep me in sanity, because sometimes you wake up and think, have I just imagined this nightmare? Is it just me? Have I joined some sort of delusional disorder, obsessive delusional disorder? And then people message me and say, no. Even like 2 days ago, I had a radiologist, radiography, like a kind of assistant, I guess. They heard a conversation whereby a mid-20-year-old had a stroke, a bleed, a hemorrhagic stroke, and they heard the conversation between consultants saying, well, the only thing I can tell that would have led to this is they had the jab yesterday. He didn't hear what was being said on the other end of the phone, but thousands and thousands of these cases are here. I've had hundreds of messages of support since that video that I did, 7-minute video that I think you've seen. Saying to me, physios, paramedics, dentists, doctors, senior managers in the NHS privately contacting me and saying, look, well done. Congratulations for speaking out. You balls of steel, brave warrior, of which I'm none, by the way. I'm just Dave Cartland doing my job, following my ethical principles of duty and my duty of my GMC's guidance to practice as well. And so I don't understand the barriers here, because these people have been personally affected in some cases, yet still not willing to speak out. I always thought it would come down to that, people being personally harmed and becoming sick themselves after 3, 4, 5. Now that is happening, but it's the patients that seem to be coming to me through my private practice now. And they're angry. They're realizing they're putting the dots together and saying, I've had 3 or 4 jabs, never been right since, developed this autoimmune condition, that autoimmune condition, had a clot 2 months ago. My next door neighbour's just dropped down dead with a stroke in her 30s. My next door neighbour, the other side's just had we just buried her. She just dropped down dead. She had cancer, and 2 weeks later she was gone. This is not affecting the unvaccinated community. It's not simple as that. It's really easy. I keep saying it's like some sort of top tip. Just ask your patients how many bloody jabs they've had. Simple as that. And you'll soon see the correlation of your young oncology patients coming to the ward that have got metastatic disease, palliation from the outset. Ask them how many jabs they've had. And, I had an oncologist that absolutely schooled her the other week, came to me for a sick note because she said she's witnessing what her words were carnage on the wards. Then I asked her, I said, what are you seeing? And she said what I've just said, 20, 30-year-olds, young, aggressive, rare tumours, metastatic diagnosis. And 2 things really upset me. Safe and effective triggers me. And second is doctors are baffled. And she said those 2 words in the same sentence. And I said, you don't think it could be the COVID-19 vaccine? No, I said the COVID-19 gene therapy. She said, do you mean gene therapy? I said, well, you know how it works, and it's mRNA. She went, is it? Firstly, she didn't know it was mRNA, and this was in 2023 summertime-ish.
So this
And she said it's not.
Sorry, this is 2023 summertime.
Summertime 2023. So this is like years to find this out for yourself. Bearing in mind, it says it in Pfizer's own documents, Moderna's own documents. Done an interview, I've held these up, posted it, read them out ad verbatim, posted to LinkedIn, got permanently suspended for spreading misinformation, fully referenced, cited. Holding it up to the camera and read it out, got suspended. So this is the level of censorship. So if that's not sinister to your average member of the public as to why this is happening. But yeah, that doctor was bemused, and I pulled up the Pfizer documents, Moderna, where it says these products are unlikely to reach the market in 2019. This was 2019, and they're riddled with kind of qualitative, quantitative control issues that they may never be brought to market. I think the phrase was used, and this was 6 months before they were brought to market. And they specifically called them immunomodulatory gene therapies in the Pfizer Moderna documents, at least. And so, I showed her, and she came out in a kind of grey sweat and thought you could see the penny dropping. And then she sort of marched out the room with a sick note, and that was it. And, I just.
Up there, was that doctor you're just referring to there? That's the oncology one who had a whole lot of cancer cases.
Yeah, an oncology consultant.
So, oncology consultant. Now, do these people not hear of Angus Dalglish is British, and he's spoken out and expressed his concerns, and he's a very well-known oncologist.
And he's not just a doctor or oncologist, he's a professor as well. So, and apparently we're all conspiracy theorists with all these degrees that we have. But I mean, Angus has been brilliant from the start. He spoke out. Yeah. And, you're just hoping that, one or two doctors would say, yeah, we're seeing the same. Let's join band together. I'm really angry, to be honest, towards my colleagues, because they're picking us off now. My approach is this, firstly, look at your children in the eye and explain to them why you were silent and why you did not stop this when you could have done. But secondly, I see becoming a medic. I've always been a team captain for every team I play for, except when my years I've got a bit older, and so my position in football teams isn't as prominent. But the captain does, he looks out for his players, and if someone's getting some chip on the pitch, he'll go and clip the player and just make sure that give them a pat on the back, the one who's being owned, but then also fight for them as well. Give a little elbow to the guy and all the rest of it, just to get on. That's what you do. Somebody's struggling, you help them, and I've not seen that from my scientist colleagues, my doctor colleagues. They're watching these good people that I've just mentioned. A few I'll be picked off. I'm about to be flung in front of a kangaroo court for 15 days. I mean, murderers don't have a 15-day trial. 28 months it will take them to get me to that day, and I've still to this day not had a single opportunity to give oral rebuttal, oral defense of accusations that have been made against me, which are frankly absurd, because the charges are, I don't know if you ever see me on Instagram or TikTok, or mainly X is what I'm on now.
Yeah,
on X, you must see the abuse I get, and it's daily, it's incessant. It's not just trolling, abuse, and bullying; it's doxing. It's aggressive, it's stalking. Actually, it's malicious communications, and it's daily. And the perpetrators, at least two of them, have said these things about me, and they've gone to the GMC and said I've accused them of bullying, I'm being accused of bullying, harassment, online incitement of hatred, and what's the other one? Transphobia. I mean, the fact I'm being accused of bullying, harassment, and incitement is sickening, really sickening. If it wasn't so sick and malicious, it would be quite funny, because all three perpetrators have had a massive role in at least incitement against me, let alone perpetual bullying. One particular complainant is known to be a well-known Twitter troll. At the moment, this person's currently going around the internet mocking the vaccine injuries. He claims to have, isolated the virus himself on his farm. There's no such thing as an AstraZeneca injury. He's mocking people who are vaccine injured, saying, you're a liar, you're photoshopping your husband's death certificate who died after the vaccine. There is no such thing as a vaccine injury. It's just, and these guys, I mean, I'm actually quite looking forward to it in October, because these guys have made, the reason I had beef with them to start with, they went on TV. They went on TV and made claims, some of them, made claims that were incorrect. Like, for example, I use one claim: one single COVID-19 vaccine will give you 100% protection from death and hospitalization from COVID-19. Well, as I mentioned with my little audit there, it wasn't just positive testing. Some of these were going into hospital with alleged COVID symptoms. And the UK data at the time showed that was utter nonsense. And this was put out to masses of people on primetime morning TV shows. And essentially is a lie. It's fraud. You're telling lies to the public, and I call it out. That gets spun around as Dr. Cartman's launching incitement and his anti-vax mob crowd onto me, and it's affecting my nerves, and etc., etc. Same as the others.
Is that person a doctor who went on the primetime TV?
That's a doctor, and there's another doctor who's an obstetrician who was saying very early in February 2021 that it was safe, not only safe, extremely safe to give a COVID vaccine in pregnancy. And made claims that it was identical to the technology used in flu and pertussis vaccines, which is, again, just both of them are downright lies. Unless she's hopped in a time machine and gone to 2029 and can look retrospectively and say it's because she said long term, I think. Long term. So, if you're claiming long term safety in something that's only just been rolled out weeks ago, it's just a lie by definition. And so, again, I quoted that, and it's been turned around as Dr. Khan's incited an anti-vax mob crowd onto me, because obviously the general public realise that that's just nonsense, absolute nonsense. And so, what are we doing here? We're promoting liars here and listening to them. I mean, I've sent to the GMC ample evidence now that these guys have perpetrated incitement, harassment of me. Many of the abusive accounts that I get abused every day, trolled, obsessive accounts that are set up just to watch me. You've seen at the moment, I'm fighting back a little bit to 2 or 3 of them, which perhaps I shouldn't feed the trolls. However, the same follower, you look at the top follower of every single perpetrator of abuse towards me, it's one of the GMC complainants. It's one of the GMC complainants claiming I'm a bully. Number one follower. All this abuse I get, all the swearing, all the incessant bullying is number one follower. It's the same person who will remain unnamed. But every single one on X will know who this person is, because he does it to everyone. People have written articles about this man's activities. Yet he's got the balls and audacity to take a good man, a family man, a Christian man, to court for bullying and harassment. The absolute absurdity of it. But
So
We'll
this
see
is
what happens in October anyway.
is this what kind of court is this? Do you mind me asking what kind of court? This isn't a GMC court. This is just an open, like a normal.
No, it's a medical practitioner tribunal. So
Okay.
it's like it's a court in inverted commas, except it's GMC who are subject to no one's regulation. Who regulates the regulator? My question's always been, what business is it of the GMC to referee slanging matches? I keep saying, look, you've got me for harassment. You say, what definition of harassment are you using? Because if I'm calling you names every day for 100 days in a row and you tell me to stop, and I carry on, that's harassment. If it's just name calling or cyber stalking, etc. But if the person claiming bullying and harassment is doing the same back 100-fold, 1,000-fold in some cases, and then goes to the GMC and says this doctor is bullying and harassing me, this is sick. And the GMC have got it, by the way. They've got all of this. They've got testimonies from hundreds of witnesses that say this is what Dr. Cotton's been subject to. We've seen it with our own eyes. Screenshots of the abuse. I've been called everything from Harold Shipman on steroids to a dangerous individual. I'm responsible for the murders of thousands of babies, etc., etc. It goes on. Abuse every single day, and it takes its toll. And I've not asked for this. All I've done is speak out against, ethical flaws that I've seen: informed consent, bodily autonomy, coercion within the whole process, patient safety. And I thought I picked easy wins in that I went for children and pregnant mums. You don't let pregnant mums have soft cheese. You get them off all their medicines. You try and completely clutter their medicines list. And, even the BNF for very simple things, say, use with caution in pregnancy, are very basic things. But suddenly they were giving this mRNA to pregnant women, claiming its safety based upon the fact that this product there were no pre-rollout safety data trials on pregnant women. In fact, Pfizer excluded pregnant women, anyone under 30, over 50, or anyone with any comorbidity. So even saying to a 70-year-old, diabetic, it's safe, it's a lie. You're lying to your patient. So that's it. And then I looked at things like lockdown and the deleterious effect that it would have on mental health, which I'm seeing now in my clinics. Teenagers and kids, anxious, OCD, cutting themselves, 10-year-olds cutting themselves.
So they've been affected by the lockdowns that occurred in 2020.
Yeah, you ask the parents, you say, when did this all start? The lockdowns, every time.
Right.
Lockdowns. And that's why I studied not only the futility of them, but the economic and the mental health, psychological collateral damage that these things. So, again, another conspiracy theory of Dr. Carlin, masks. It doesn't take a lot of digging into masks to see that they're useless rags, pointless. And, I see them as an IQ test now. If a doctor's got a mask on, then I'd go and see another doctor, if I'm honest with you. As simple as that. I'll be concise. And then finally, my final crime has been that I've stepped up to the plate and helped to listen to, advise, and help medically those that have been injured. So pretty heretical stuff here we're talking about. That I've dared to help the vaccine injured raise their profile, let people know they're there, and that's my next project. I've got some of my patients. I've got some horrendous stories to share. And I'm going to be doing podcasts in the next few weeks every day where they're going to tell their story. The patient's going to be on the screen. The patient that's had a stroke will be on the screen, so people can see what this has done to people's spouses. And those stories are going to come out in the next week. So watch my Twitter and you'll see these interviews. So absolutely taking the histories. My heart breaks. That no one cares. No one cares about them.
Yeah.
These people, and these people have been told that it was a coincidence. One harrowing case of a guy who had a stroke after his first jab. This is the first one I'm going to do next week. Then he had 20 different stroke events, mini strokes or completed strokes. He's now got a peg fed. He's peg fed. He can't swallow, communicate. It's a fit and healthy 70-year-old man. And it happened in a very tight frame of time after the vaccine. Told by his neurology, stroke and so on, nothing to do with it. They've even turned down his vaccine damage payment scheme request. The guy is literally, he just exists now. He just exists. And the wife came on the call and he was just in a wheelchair, just there, slumped, drooling. And this is what we're doing to people, and no one cares. And even to get a bit of compensation, even applying for social care, they've been rejected because they've got money in the bank. So, you commit a crime and harm a husband that was fit, healthy, 71-year-old active. He's now fully 100% dependent on carer support and wife. They won't even help until they've spent all their savings. So it's not as if they're helping the afflicted either. You have to fight tooth and nail in the UK. I've been involved in some really horrific cases assisting families that have been rejected from the vaccine damage payment scheme. one guy got rejected. He lost use of his legs, particularly one leg, and he got rejected because it wasn't 60% of his body that had been left. I know people who've had amputations that have had to really fight tooth and nail to get 120 grand, which is nothing really to compensate for the loss of your leg and all the consequences. So it makes me really angry. This does, honestly. I have to. It's righteous anger, but I have to sometimes take a breath, pray about it, and try and do what Jesus taught us, and to kind of turn the other cheek and forgive, which is hard sometimes. But
yeah, I think it's a good idea. What you're doing is to getting the victims to speak for themselves, because it's always much more impactful that way. Do you mind if I just ask, what does PEG fed mean? You said he had 20 stroke events and then he's PEG fed. What does that mean?
PEG fed means he can't swallow food safely without it going into his lungs. So because he's got that, they put a tube that bypasses the esophagus, the food pipe, and so it goes straight in through a tube, liquid fed from an external tube straight into the stomach, or duodenum, which is the small intestine. So that's it, can't eat anymore. One other example, a 30-year-old who's had a stroke. This is a terrible example. This was at the same surgery where the oncologist told me that she was stressed out, etc. So the patient was in, and she'd had an AstraZeneca jab. And after the AstraZeneca jab, developed within a very tight time frame a DVT of a leg. Now, 29-year-olds don't get DVTs unless they've got plethoras of other risk factors. It was an AstraZeneca, funnily enough. Then it's not as if they spotted the trend between the vaccine and the jab. At that point, they gave her another vaccine, and she had another clot in the other leg. So anyway, come December, they're saying, well, you need your third one. We'll mix it up a little bit now. We'll give you a Moderna. Now, if anyone can show me the evidence of safety of a Moderna combination, or any of these strange combos that they're giving now, they're giving flu jabs and COVID jabs, one in each arm, absence of any safety data, but they're still doing it anyway. So this poor woman had a mini stroke, and then within a week after the mini stroke, the day after her Moderna jab, had a stroke the week after. And they told her it was, get ready for this one, not just long COVID, but it was asymptomatic long COVID, because the woman had never tested or had any flu-like illness. They said, well, it must have been asymptomatic long COVID. Get your head around that for a concept. A week after a Moderna jab, a young 30-year-old gets a stroke, and she's told it's long COVID. And she believed it was COVID, long COVID related, asymptomatic long COVID, that killer disease that you have to test for to check you've got it. It's just insanity.
So
we were told about these times in the Bible, weren't we? At the end times, there would be certain things, and certainly things are flagging up. So
yeah, it's really, really bad. I wanted to read out, I did see something that you put on Twitter from someone, just to give an example of what a doctor has said to you in private. And you said that you've been given permission. Well, obviously you put it on Twitter. You said, do you mind if I read it out? Just so people can hear.
Of course, yeah. I mean, this was on a day I'd received probably about 10 or 15 similar messages. So just to put that into context.
Okay. I work in an NHS hospital. It's evident we are seeing patients presenting with turbo cancers, strokes, Guillain-Barré. They are also young with aggressive stage 4 ovarian, lung, liver metastases. And although doctors are passing comment, nobody is really raising concern. We were pushed to take the vaccine and declined. So this is obviously a doctor or a nurse who's actually declined the vaccine. Our jobs threatened, and all colleagues turned their back on us. We were moments from losing our jobs until the mandatory vaccines were withdrawn. They are still moving around the hospital trying to give the vaccine. Everyone's so frightened to discuss it because most of us have had the jab. Others don't want to start the conversation and are scared of the consequences. So frightened for the future. So that's someone who's a doctor or a nurse admitting that they can see the link, I guess, between the vaccine and the injuries, but everyone's afraid to say anything.
At some point, I'm going to put these all together in a montage, because people keep saying you made that up, you typed it up yourself, etc., etc. This is what happens. No one will just consider for a moment that it could be correct and genuine. I've got hundreds of these messages. At some point, I will montage and ask permission and redact the details of personhood. Yeah, I mean, that's very typical. Everyone knows. I think I'd probably say the majority of doctors do know now. I'd probably say we're up there in the 60, 70%, even 80%. Where are they? I don't know where they're. They're privately tapping me on the shoulder. Even a very senior doctor who had myopericarditis after the vaccine tapped me on the shoulder and said, I know it's a vaccine. Fair play for speaking out, brave, and all the rest of it, and kind of warned me that my career's in peril. And she said around her office, the people dropping or telling stories of relatives that are dropping, or young people that are having heart issues and strokes and clots. And I don't know how people can stay silent and sleep at night. I really don't. This is where it comes into kind of mass formation psychosis, grand delusion, as per 2 Thessalonians 2. That at the end times there'll be a grand delusion, and it says pharmakia in it as well in the Greek translation. So yeah, it's that we're being told what's playing out is definitely spiritual.
Yeah.
I mean, this I can't explain it in any other way. What I would say, there's probably a physiological aspect to this as well now, and psychological, because you've got to remember these doctors have not only been complicit in giving it and keeping their head down and giving it to everyone with a pulse or without a pulse, actually, in pregnancy cases, because they're giving it to the unborn baby as it crosses the placenta. But these doctors have also had it themselves, so they're probably ailing in their physical health and actually realizing, oh, I won't swear. I was going to swear there. I won't, realise that Dr. Carter might be right. And, the problem with doctors is not only they're proactively selected at med school to become conformists and non-critical thinkers or sheep mentalities, but they've also got egos. They've God complexes. These doctors really do think they are above all else, above everyone. And that's not the sort of doctor I've ever been, which is why I've not fitted in. I don't think I've not been that doctor that's used my title to gain favour in any way. But these doctors got ego, and it's hard. It's human nature, isn't it, to admit you're wrong, or that you've been injured yourself. I mean, even when doctors do start getting injured, I don't think they'll start equating it until the very end, and maybe their dying breath must be Dave Cartman was right.
The irony in all of this, though, is that they've got these egos, but in effect, by not doing what you've done and standing up and speaking out, they've actually done their careers and the discipline of medicine a great disservice, because I feel that there must be a lot of people in England now that don't trust their doctor anymore, right? And there will also be.
Yeah, absolutely. And there is actually GMC guidance on this. I have to remind the GMC and all my colleagues, it's called the duty of candour. They can look it up on the internet. It's called the GMC duty of candour. So when you do mess up for the exact same reasons you've just mentioned, to maintain trust in the profession, that you must speak out, own it, apologise, and let's make recompense towards it. But these doctors aren't remembering this fact, and it just beggars belief, really, that people do that. And the trust has gone now. And the other aspect of that is, the NHS is crumbling. It's in its last year or 2 or 3, maybe at worst. It's crumbling. Soon to be replenished by AI, for example, ChatGPT, etc. So these doctors are fighting for a career that's probably not going to be there, number one. Number two, what we've seen in the UK, this rhetoric. Now, we saw it where a vaccine injured chap faced off against the Prime Minister on a primetime TV show and said, "Oh, look me in the eye and see the anguish," for example. And ultimately, first thing he said, what did he say? Oh, it's just the doctors. The doctors told us. We're just politicians. Like, we don't know. We're just following the orders. I've heard that before in history, but we won't go there. And so, yeah, that's what they're going to do. And I've tried to warn my doctors, you're clinging on to saving face of the NHS that ain't going to be there. They're not going to protect you. And I've always said it's going to go all the way down to the vaccinator, because, the vaccinator will pass it to the nurses, to the doctors, to the local NHS, to the government, to Big Pharma, who take an indemnity from prosecution and pass it down and pass it down. The government have already passed it down, haven't they? It's the doctors, the NHS, the doctors, and then they pass it down to they're just going to say, well, it's the person who injected, who pressed the syringe. That's who. It's like me, if I come up to you and stab you in an arm with a syringe and you drop down dead, I should be arrested. Facts, for what did I give you? It's just killed you. But except in a vaccine centre, when you can do that freely and get away with it.
Well, I don't know how it works in England, but even if the injector is not your doctor was the one who advised you to take the shot.
Well,
so I'm not sure that the doctor can claim that he's not guilty.
Well, this is what we'll have to play out in court, and this is why I'm asking people now to take litigations out against their doctor, because due diligence wasn't shown. Somebody's got to take some blame here. And like I say, the people at the top, the rich folk, have took indemnity from prosecution. They're even using it to this day under an emergency use authorization. Where's the emergency here in 2024? Was there ever one? We can but speculate. But the fact is, someone's got to take the blame, and everyone's going to pass it down to the person who injected. And you know what? Those poor volunteers Those poor volunteers that were jabbing, for the good of the people, were completely hoodwinked for starters. Those healthcare assistants in their hundreds and thousands, those very junior nurses doing it for the NHS and for the elderly, with the right spirit and the right intention. I'm not going to say it wasn't, but they didn't do due diligence, and that should have actually been the doctors, because academically they should have been researching this. And when you've got doctors that don't know that masks don't work and they're harmful, and you've got doctors that don't know it's mRNA or how it works, or they don't know even what the Pfizer documents are. Well, my wife even got told, she was breastfeeding at the time of her first, and she got told by a colleague, I'd love to name him, but I won't be bitter. And he told her, she said specifically, is this vaccine safe in breastfeeding? And he said, yes, it is. And that was very early. I can't remember when she had her first job, my wife, but told her that it was safe in breastfeeding.
No, that wasn't tested in the
Absurd.
phase 3 trial.
Well, in June 2021, I hold up a document on the aforementioned interview that I was banned from the MHRA, saying some 6 months after the rollout began, again, fully referenced, the document was, we should not be giving this to women of childbearing age or breastfeeding women. Robust contraception must be used in this cohort. And that was 6 months after we'd been giving it to them, and still to this day, still in obstetric offices of the land and the world, telling pregnant women to get their 5th booster. I don't know.
Yeah.
When we know it crosses the placenta, and we know it enters a child, and I'm starting to see now just a small signal coming through. Kids that are now harmed by this, that had vaccinated moms, and vaccinated moms are waking up, having eureka moments, and then saying, well, somebody mentioned that, my kid's been like really slow to get through his early milestones, and he's got this weird autoimmune condition, eczema falling off his body in chunks, and couldn't be the vaccine, could it, doc? And while you can't prove it, it's certainly started to see it. I mean, a midwife recently just told me what was going on in the obstetric suites, labour suites, and it is evil. It is evil, and they won't speak out publicly. They've said they're going to forward on any auditory figures and stuff, but ultimately they're saying babies are being born syndromic, was the word she used, underweight, intrauterine growth retardations, poor placental blood flow when they're delivering the placenta in the 3rd phase of pregnancy, dusky grey calcified, coming out in chunks, having to take moms to theatre for retained product evacuation. Hate that phrase, retained product, but placental evacuation that's been left behind. Emergency sections, babies coming from normal vaginal deliveries, in distress at the end of the labour, straight to NICU. The figures are there. The infertility figures are there. The miscarriage rates are there. Just get, anyone who thinks I'm making this up, just get yourself on reproductive VAERs. It's tragic. It's very clear what's going on here. The jabs came out, the miscarriage rate went up and down like that. And you look at any of the sort of obstetric and gynecological outcomes, and in the last 2 years since the rollout, everything's skyrocketed off the scale, and that's for everything. So, get yourself on reproductive bars. Anyone who thinks I'm a lunatic conspiracy theorist, it's all there. Everything I do is backed with evidence and facts. So.
That little video you did in the middle of 2021, you were referring to that phase 3 trial that Pfizer did. They asked that no one get pregnant, right? They asked for people to be on contraception. I've been through the document, I've seen it. So it was definitely not for reproduction, right? This Pfizer jab for this trial of 40,000. But then what happened was, I think you said it somewhere. I saw you notice.
Is this the 274 women that did get pregnant post-marketing?
Life being what it is, 270 or 240 made a mistake and got pregnant when they were part of the trial and they'd taken the shot. And then you noted how many babies died. Well, they only looked into 30. They only followed up.
Well, the figures in a nutshell were, from the top of my head, on the spot. I think it was something circa 274 patients had it, were pregnant incidentally. Of those 274, a little smidge under 50% of them had some sort of adverse reaction that were listed in the document, but then they subclassified them as severe, and the severe were a quarter, pretty much give or take a quarter, had to seek medical advice, and they classified it as a severe adverse reaction within a short time frame. So if that's not a safety signal, I don't know what is. They looked at fetal outcomes, and of the 274, it's not labour intensive, is it, to follow up with a phone call saying, how's your baby doing? It's not difficult, particularly the gravity of this result. But anyway, they only bothered to follow up on 32, and of the 32, 5 were still gestation. And so the 20, my maths is struggling here, 27 that were left over one live birth, 26 fetal deaths in and out of utero. So, whatever happened to the other 200 and odd, we don't know because they didn't follow them up. If they were all live births, great. Well, that's only going to add to your case that you're probably hitting normal abortion rates then across that percentage of people.
Yeah.
But why? My question was always, what happened to those 200 and whatever, 274 minus 32 women? Why not report it? But you've got to take it as, you've got to take what's on the paper in front of you. You've got 27 women, 26 fetal deaths, one live birth, a quarter having severe adverse events. And we're telling the Royal College in the UK, the Royal College of British Immunologists said it's safe to give in pregnancy. So it's just mixed messages. And obviously pregnant women, they're just doing what the midwife tells them. They're doing what the obstetrician tells them because there's that trust. There's that trust there that's, age old. This goes back centuries. You trust your doctor. And this is how they've hoodwinked so many people, But my rebuttal to that is, look at the litigations that these big pharmaceutical industries paid out. Moderna never even brought a vaccine out, ever. They've not been in the vaccine industry, full stop. Our Prime Minister's got heavy pecuniary interest in Moderna, for example. So, you don't want to be, but there is this mentality now of, I keep using the analogy of murdering. If I murdered somebody, which I don't intend to, just to put that on record, you kill somebody with a gun, you hide the gun, you find an alibi and you lie about it, and you deny it until evidence is brought against you. And so we've got a lot of people here at the moment that are hiding their guns, and they're wiping the fingerprints off of things and finding alibis and blaming someone else or denying it. But I'm sorry, the science is settled now. It really is settled this time, not what BBC tell us or Pharma tell us. Look at the litigation history. I mean, I always use Francis Kelsey calling out the thalidomide scandal. I feel a bit like Francis Kelsey would have done on steroids, really, because it's been overwhelmingly, surrounded by, attackers. And she just said, we shouldn't be giving this stuff in pregnancy. And, the results then bore out that these poor children were born massively disabled. And she was right. And they probably would have sectioned her at the time, or tried to section her and kicked her out of a job and took a nursing license away. And so history repeats itself again and again.
Yeah. Except this is on a massive scale.
Yeah. And they're still doing it. It's not as if they've realised the mistake and stopped and realised and said, right, stop. We apologise here. We messed up. Save face. But no, it's weird. It's a strange mentality to keep doing it. You're digging a hole here. That's where that whole metaphor comes from, doesn't it? About keep digging a hole when you're in trouble. But they keep digging and digging, and they're just digging their own career graves, as far as I'm concerned. And, like I said, they're going to get slung under the bus that is, the litigations and the rest of it. So that'll come in due course. We'll look back at this in 20 years, I have no doubt, and people will be wondering what happened to the world, what happened to the scientists and doctors, and will we ever get this back? The trust? Will we ever get back the honour of the profession when 99.999999% of doctors are just cowards? I'm going to call it out: cowards, selfish, weak. If you're putting your doctor's stethoscope around your throat and your scrubs and your tunic on today, why are you doing it? And what's the point if you're going to not call this out on one hand and then claim to go and help your patients and advocate for them in whatever capacity? Why bother? Go and get a job doing something else, because you're not following your professional code of conduct, and your ethics are off a little bit. Your ethics are off compass.
Can I ask you something? Are the British, some of these patients that come to you that are vaccine injured, once you explain to them and then they start to believe you because they've been gaslit that they are actually vaccine injured, are they going back to their old family doctor or to the person who injected them and challenging them? Like, are the patients themselves challenging, and are the patients themselves reporting the doctors to, I'm assuming it's the GMC, if you want to report them for malpractice?
Yeah, I mean, I've said several times, and I've kept it in sort of very grey terms. If anyone is concerned, and I'll repeat this on this interview, there is a way of, reporting your doctor to the GMC through GMC Online, or the nurses through the nurse and midwifery councils. If you believe that, and if it's anything like I've had, it's guilty till proven innocent, and so that this is where the fun and games will begin. But my experience is people will make the correlation between their vaccine and their injury, go to see the doctor. The doctor will hold the crucifix up to them and say, how dare you accuse the vaccine? It's absolutely not that. Gaslight them, give them some antidepressants or sedatives, and out they go. And so at that point, that's where the patients are like, I'm never going to go back to this doctor. I won't even take my goldfish to see the doctor at this rate. But
I'm
Yeah, the
just
trust has gone.
Yeah, I know the trust is gone. I'm shocked there aren't more that want to report these doctors. Like the perfect example is the one you gave me before of the patient that you said that they had that was a succession of AstraZeneca, I think AstraZeneca, and then Moderna. Some doctor after the second shot has still recommended this patient get the Moderna shot after they've already had terrible injuries. That's malpractice. That's how can that not
It's
be?
malpractice. The malpractice is just on another level. I'm seeing some really bizarre things. Saw somebody this week. I'll try and remember the case. Who'd had a positive D dimer, which is a blood clotting test.
Yeah.
Chest pain, breathlessness, D dimer, and the doctor didn't feel it was a PE. Didn't do a CTPA to rule out the clot. It's like this is basic level. Neurologists are seeing patients with vaccine injuries, and I'm hearing horrendous cases where the doctor's like very aggressive from the outset. As soon as the V word's mentioned, they're not even hitting them with a tendon hammer. They're not checking pupils. They're not doing basic cranial nerves, cerebellar signs. They're not even touching them. They're telling them from the outset because their symptoms are so wide-ranging, multi-systemic, and don't fit into a conventional diagnostic criterion. They just say, you're making it up. Your functional neurological disorder is the top diagnosis in the UK at the moment, I gather. Functional neurological disorder, like it's fun to pretend to not walk around, and it's fun to become anally incontinent. It's fun to lose your memory. You're just making it up for fun. The gaslighting is unbelievable and horrendous, harrowing, abhorrent, disgraceful. I've got no other words for it. But yeah, they won't go back to the doctors, and so this is why the doctor's surgeries are empty. I've just been I just went to a surgery. Great story, actually. I'm getting some jip on Twitter from, funnily enough, GPs from that surgery. But what happened was I went to the pharmacy. I've got a bad back, so I took some painkillers. So I went to get some strong painkillers. I don't usually use meds, but it's quite bad. So I took a prescription for some painkillers. And I noticed the pharmacy on a Friday peak time, 5 o'clock in the evening, was jammed. People picking up boxes of medicines and 2 bags full of medicines. And there were probably about 20, 30 people around the corner in that Friday afternoon pharmacy. Behind me was a surgery with 3 GP practices in, and not a human entered or left the building in the half an hour I was in that queue. I needed to go and use the men's room at the time, so I went in for a quick. I went so well. I came out anyway, and I decided to take some pictures of the room. It was empty. 3 waiting rooms empty on a Friday afternoon, and I'm like, well, where are the doctors? Where are the patients? There's one receptionist man in the 3. So I posted these pictures on Twitter, and the backlash I had was horrendous. From the doctors told me that I've made them feel vulnerable and upset, and they were that busy. They saw me enter the building, enter the cubicle for 30 seconds. Obviously, I didn't wash my hands in that time. That's what they speculate. It's professional people. Obviously, that busy. They were watching me on CCTV. I was literally in the building 30 seconds, just went snap, 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 redacted the details of the surgery. My question is, what are the doctors doing in 2024? Guessing on the telephone. I have to keep reminding them the basics of diagnosis. It leans on history, examination, and bedside tests, 2 of which you need to actually see the patient for. And actually just gives you a good clinical impression calling the patient from the waiting room. You take a sort of mental snapshot of the patient as to how bad they look. If someone looks sick, as it were, before they even stand up. So, guessing over the phone at these various things. And obviously, if you're not seeing patients, you're not getting the full picture, you're making misdiagnoses. It's just, there's no excuse for not seeing your patients now. And, the guy said, I've seen 100 patients today. The guy who rebutted me, I said, well, where were they? This is the peak time of day, 5 o'clock on a Friday. And he should have been heaving to the rafters with people with their toddlers wanting to get checked out, and coughs, people for their last minute antibiotics. And there was not, you'll have to look back in my Twitter to see the images. It was like a ghost town. The doctors need to wake up and do some work. Now, I agree there's always a role for triage, and not everything that comes to see a doctor needs to see physically. You can do medication reviews or quick check-ins with people, follow-ups without seeing them. But if someone's got a new symptom, do them the service of seeing them. And at that surgery that was empty, there's about a 2-month wait for a routine appointment now at each of the practices. So I know patients from each one that have tried to get appointments for routine issues, and they just say, fill in an e-consult. Is it an emergency for today? And so this is where we're losing the health of the people that have got that diarrhea they've had for 6 weeks that they didn't really feel was an on-the-day emergency, because that's all the doctors are seeing now. And so then that's where the metastases start from that bowel cancer that was missed.
Right.
So there is an element of that in the excess mortality, but doctors see your patients and then that'll stop. And B, that doesn't explain the excess mortality in the young ones, where it's peaking the 20 to 40-year-olds in the UK data anyway. It's the young vaccinated. And, they're very, they hold back on that. I think New Zealand just released the data, didn't they, about, differentiating the excess death by vaccine status. It's, read it for yourself. I'm not going to ruin the headline, but it's damning, isn't it? I know you've read it, but for your viewers, it's damning. It's beyond a reasonable doubt. There's a clear correlation. End of story.
So the point you're making about that practice that's empty is they're definitely seeing patients because there's a 2-month wait, but they're all online. They're all e-consults, right? Which is not how medicine should be done. So that's
they were saying about an hour earlier it was heaving, and they've worked, hammer and tongs, and it's just empty because they've worked so tirelessly to clear it. That was their excuse. But it's trending kind of at the moment. People sending pictures of their empty waiting rooms across the land. Even this morning, I've had one 11:45, an appointment for a nurse. Should have been heaving. Practice with 10,000 patients, empty. Even the surgery I've been working at, it was a steady trickle. It wasn't empty. It never was. It was a busy practice, but there was never a heaving waiting room. When I started my career, that was the site. You walked into work and you saw this cacophony of coughs and sneezes as you walked through them to get to your room, and you just started working your way through them. There was never an empty waiting room.
See, that's a good conversation. The difference between, because you said you qualified as a GP in 2014, I think you said. So how does you being a GP now differ from 2014? If you're just going to say like a couple of sentences, it's 2024. How does it look different in the UK?
I think we covered both of them really. We've got a lot of people in primary care, general practice that are undertrained. I'm going to say undertrained and not fit for purpose. Number one. Number two, the time frame of seeing patients in 10 minutes is unsafe, ineffective. You can't touch any of the medical issues, and just all those principles, the ethical principles of good medical practice, duty of candor, confidentiality, consent, gone out the window. I've watched it just fizz away over the years, and standards are so low. Standards are so low. Even in doctors now, I'm seeing doctors making really weird decisions. Really strange, odd decisions, strange choices of antibiotics. In fact, I'm seeing doctors now shaking. They've got shakes and they've got cognitive issues, and you see in the notes that they type up they're making spelling mistakes, and very strange future general practice has got, and good luck to them. That's all I say. I'm not going to be part of it anymore. And good luck to the patients. That's the ones I feel for, the patients, because again, the surgery I've just left, one of the other doctors who've been working again, hammer and tongs to help them out, he's left as well. So that's 2 good doctors gone, because you just haven't got the decency to address the elephant in the room of patient safety. This surgery's just announced their spring booster campaign, whilst most of them have refused to take any further jabs. So.
The doctors themselves have refused to take them, but they're happy to
the senior doctor. The senior doctor there called me a hero on the first day I got there. I walked in, I thought I've been out of practice for some 10 months. I answered a bit of an SOS call. I'm not going to name and shame the practice, but I remember working on the first day, seeing my first patient, got a knock on the door, senior partner, who basically told me his views aligned with mine, and said he'd been following me, and and even the practice managers, 2 of them had categorically said, in fact, I'd even signed books for them. I'd done a poetry book, signing books before Christmas. Then a couple of weeks later, the spring booster campaigns rolled out, and they said, right, we're going to be bringing the campaign to this surgery, and all the doctors' heads straight to the ground because they knew that we'd spoken privately. And as we speak now, they're probably jabbing people from the street, for COVID-19, jab number 9 or 8, whatever, onto now.
Can I ask a quick question there? So senior doctor, you mentioned a senior doctor, and we're not going to say what the name of the practice is, but it's a senior doctor, 2 practice managers, but it's still under the NHS. Is that why they can't put a stop to the spring booster campaign? Is there any way that they, like, if who owns the practice? Like, is it
I'll answer that in an analogy. So every 3 years as a doctor, you have to revalidate, and you have something called appraisal process every year.
Right.
And a couple of years ago, I had an appraisal process that kind of answers that question in a way. So he commended me for my bravery, my concern for patient safety in the first part. Now, this was under the integrity and probity section of the assessment that he was making of my practice. By the way, they failed me this year on not keeping up to date with medical practice. So they're refusing my revalidation alongside the GMC investigation. Sweet irony, saying I've not kept up to date with quality improvement activities. Going back to this appraisal in question, the doctors that commended me and then went back in the second paragraph, and I've posted this many times on Twitter because it's so illuminating to the problem. He said, But unfortunately, Dr. Carton, you work in the NHS and you need to follow NHS consensus. That was the word he used. And he said, really, if I were you, you should have kept your head down and shrugged your shoulders. It was gold dust for me because, I mean, what sort of a sentence is that from a senior GP in the area saying, you should follow consensus opinion, i.e. never question, just do what the crowd tell you. And the crowd being, the powers that be, NHS England, and, the trickle of information that comes from them, bought and paid for. I mean, I won't even talk about MHRA. And he told me to keep my head down and shrug my shoulders. 2024 NHS, guys.
Yeah, and that's your answer, because even though that senior doctor and the 2 practice managers won't take the shot themselves because they're under NHS, they have to do the spring booster.
They're following this guy's advice, keeping the head down, shrug the shoulders. And actually, the practices genuinely are on their knees financially, on their knees. And so, a little bit of a pep to their accounts through a few boosters here and there. I don't know what they're paying them for each one now, but it's not a lot. It's like 10 quid or something, £10.
Okay, so it's not that much money. So money's not the main driver. I'd say it's the NHS rules, right?
Yeah, the incessant push to get everything, man, woman, child, born and unborn, anything with a pulse, mRNA, genetically modified.
Yeah, I think that sentence is actually really important. And that's one of the first things I noticed after the Pfizer rollout. Anything with a pulse gets a jab, because that was the part, that's how I knew straight away. Like, what would that be? January 2021, December 2020, we're going to, who I know first? The British pregnant nurses were the first to go, the first to be vaccinated. January 2021, I think, is when you first, and when I saw that they were prepared to vaccinate pregnant women who weren't part of the trial, and then they were vaccinating immunocompromised people, and then it's basically what you said. Everything with a pulse gets a jab, including people. You also mentioned the other category, people who are already dying in aged care homes, who might only have 1 month, 2 months to live. They're still vaccinated.
They were going around hospices, jabbing people on syringe drivers. I mean, help me understand that. What I'd say, miscarriages is a great example. So the figures will never get to the bottom of, because 25-year-old walks in, has had a miscarriage 3 times, happens to be vaccinated. That's not hitting any headlines. No one's putting in any yellow card reports. There's a clear correlation, but you can't prove it. So these figures, the amount of people having miscarriages at the moment in their prime years of reproductive health, is off the scale. VARs have got it nailed, and you can see that on their graphs. But imagine how underreported that is. So even the adverse events are so underreported by a factor of who knows what nowadays. It's
yeah. So when you just, maybe sometimes, particularly the men might be thinking about this, if it was a first trimester miscarriage, that could just happen at home and you might not even see a doctor.
Exactly, that's what I'm saying. So these people are having recurrent, and so I've not seen many people booking in the last year or two with their green note saying, "Doc, I'm pregnant." I'm seeing a hell of a lot of the opposite. "Doctor, we can't get pregnant." And we'll test the male sperm. Only in the last 3 months, I've seen in that surgery, I saw 3 men with azoospermia in 3 months. Azoospermia means you haven't got one single functioning spermatozoa in your ejaculate, number one. Number two, loads of people with menstrual issues, so they're not even ovulating in sync. So it's the potential for pregnancy. And if you are lucky enough to get pregnancy, then you've got all the issues around the poor health of the placenta, the breathing apparatus of the fetus. And the figures, I don't know what the national figures are these days. We saw an early signal even in 21 of the birth rates of countries dropping down, only subtly, but I don't know how subtle 10 and 20% are, but I don't think that's subtle. So I'd love to see what the the birth rates are doing at the moment across the more highly vaccinated countries.
The problem with the spermatozoa, Professor Anna Burkhardt got an opportunity to do the pathology on a man who died. So he died for another reason. I think he died from a stroke after his shot. He had fathered a child before dying. And so he just went and had a look at the sperm, and they were all gone. The spermatozoa was gone. And he was able to prove vaccine spike protein in the area, no nucleic acid, right? So you couldn't say it was COVID. It was the vaccine, and that was a phenomenal piece of pathology. And that particular video went viral. I mean, Professor unfortunately has died.
Unfortunately, the professor's no longer around, and he was doing that. He was doing biopsies on post-mortem series of brains and hearts and testes. He was looking at the ejaculate. Paul Alexander was doing similar, I think, in America. And ultimately, that all the opposition will say is our anecdote. and something must have happened. It can't be the vaccine, but climate change happened in between, you know. So this fertile man who's produced a living child suddenly with azoospermia, it doesn't happen. You know, the same as I'm seeing 30-year-olds with gastric cancer metastasized at diagnosis, and breast cancer. I felt a lump of a lady about 4 weeks ago. You know, if you've got a 20-year-old that's got a lump that is felt like I felt, you know, it's a solid mobile lump, felt like a cyst, you wouldn't really be concerned other than the fact she'd had jabs. So anyway, we sent this lady. I thought it was breast cyst because she was 20 something, might have been 30 even, but it came back as metastatic bilateral breast cancer, and she'd had 3 or 4. Again, I'm doing this off that I don't want to be sort of shut down for getting the wrong information, but this is a genuine case, you know, and 30-year-olds don't get breast cancer.
The
You know, you look at the you know,
You now
again.
must be thinking, whenever you see anything suspicious in anyone who's vaccinated, in the back of your mind, you must always be thinking, I'm going to do that test for cancer because that person's been vaccinated. A good doctor
But
would.
imagine the rest of the doctors aren't doing that, so it's
They're
not on
not.
their differential radar. They're just not. And so I always do now. And look, I get accused of, you know, you're saying absolutely everything's due to vaccine injury. No, I'm not. I take a history as normal. I examine as normal. Maybe if they've had 3 or 4 vaccines, my threshold for thinking about cancer in a 30-year-old with a change of bowel habit would be to do some investigations where I wouldn't previously have done if they weren't vaccinated or in
Yeah.
previous practice. But no, if you've got somebody that's 32 and has had 4 jabs and has got change of bowel habit towards a loose motion, you would probably send them on a 2-week wait now if they're vaccinated. But other doctors aren't. They just say, oh, you've got some weird gastroenteritis and inflammatory bowel disease and stuff. But these people, you know, I don't know what to say. I mean, what I've been doing lately to these poor functional neurological disorder diagnoses is to tell them that they should go and have a blood test for their autoantibodies, do an autoantibody screen. That's as close. I mean, I was only told yesterday about some in vivo blood tests that we can do to work out. We need something that's going to be validated, test spike protein, and as you mentioned, differentiate it by, you know, COVID infection spike versus mRNA instructed spike. We need that test, and unless we've got that, the best we've got is things like anti-nuclear antibodies. So a lot of my patients have had anti-nuclear antibodies, which are essentially antibodies that attack the cells. And, you know, surprise, surprise, we're giving the instruction manual to the human body cell to produce unknown amounts of, unquantifiable amounts of spike protein across the whole network of the body. We saw that in the biodistribution data that was released by the TGA many moons ago. They knew that at the start. It didn't stop them. I was told when I had my jab, it stays in your deltoid, Dr. Carlin, for 2 hours. I was that snowed under with work that I just didn't care to check, and it was in my arm before I knew it. So certainly didn't last for 2 hours in my deltoid, believe me.
The
Made me
gentleman
ill for a
who
bit.
the gentleman who invented the lipid nanoparticle for these jabs, I think his name is Peter Cullis, said freely in a talk, I think it was in 2022, they've never been able to control their LNP. They'd like to, they can't. They know it goes everywhere. That's the inventor.
Yeah. What does that matter? It's just a conspiracy theory. I mean, this is what I'm saying. Lipid nanoparticles are not fit for human consumption. Full stop. Neither is the mRNA platform on which it's based. You know, so in combination, carnage.
Yeah.
And any doctor who denies that is sadly deluded.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if there's anything else you wanted to discuss. I want to just bring up, you've mentioned it a few times already that you're a Christian. I wanted to ask you actually, have you always been a Christian, or if not, what changed your mind?
Or the whole testimony. Do you want the whole testimony or a short
No.
version? Yeah. So
Just 30
essentially,
seconds.
I was the guy at med school who hated Christians. I hated Muslims. I don't hate, actually. That's a strong word. I hated the concept of religion. I was a full-on hardened atheist, and so without going fully into the testimony, essentially, my young brother actually became Christian out of nowhere. You know, we were the lads. We used to go out on the town, you know, in our prime, and suddenly became a Christian. I was like, what's happened here? What's happened to him? They joined a cult. I remember calling it the cult. And long story short, you know, I was having some really strange experiences at the time. I won't alienate your viewers by talking about weird demonic experiences that I was having at the time. I was calling out churches being cults and etc. Particularly Jesus Christ, I had it in for at the time. And so the long and short of it was, I started to read. It's a very similar testimony to Lee Strobel. You know, Lee Strobel, A Case for Christ. His wife was he was a journalist. His wife was a normal punter, and then became a Christian because she had a chance meeting with a Christian And he then set about debunking the Bible with his journalistic skills of disproving the Gospels accounts of the crucifixion in particular. And so I did my sort of Dave Cartland version of that. So I started with the book of Acts, actually. I started looking on Google Maps, all the places mentioned in the scriptures, working out what they were called in modern day English and where they were on Google Maps. And they were everywhere, was pinging up as a real place. I thought, oh, maybe there's more to this than it's just being a sort of fiction text. And then I started doing a sort of, I call it prophetic bingo, for want of a better phrase. I started looking at the Bible from the perspective of what's actually come true out of this book. If I can prove everything's never, ever come true, then I've got my proof to my brother, get him out of the cult, job's a good one. But that didn't happen, unfortunately. I started to see that. I read a book called Cold Case Christianity at the time, an American guy who was looking at the Bible, again, similar sort of level of, but he was looking at it from the perspective of cold cases, like detectives looking into cases that they can't find the killer. So he was going at a forensic level at the scriptures. I was going at a basic level and just saying that everything that's been said in the Old Testament has been borne out through Christ. And even now, many people can't see that from Isaiah and all the predictions. And then you look through the New Testament about what's going on. And I realized that a vast percentage of the Bible was true and had actually been borne out in real life. And so I think in the last 4 years, it's really affirmed that, because those last remaining prophetic nudges from the scriptures have come true. And I've used examples such as, Romans 1. It's a very controversial passage about what God will do. He'll give people license to a certain amount of depravity for a short while. And at the very end, he'll say, I'll give people up to sexual depravity, further sexual depravity. And then finally, what does he say? Depending on which translation you use, a reprobate mind, insanity, or a debased mind in the very last sentence of Romans 1. You look at 2 Thessalonians 2 that I mentioned earlier that said, at the end times, there will be a grand delusion. Pharmakia was mentioned. Revelation mentions pharmakia in the original Greek text. And I always look at 2 Timothy 3 as well. That always jumped out at me, 2 Timothy 3, that in the end times, there will be this generation of people living. And if you read it out, 2 Timothy 3, it's Gen Z. It's Generation Z, where people are confused. It talks about, blasphemers, boasters, lovers of themselves rather than lovers of God. Now, I know people have always loved themselves, but I only went to a pub the other day and saw people sat there, selfies going on left, right, and centre, and just seeing this real blasphemous generation with reprobate minds they're detached from reality. They're simple as that. They're detached from reality. So yeah, that in a nutshell, I was having a strange experience spiritually at the time. I'll touch on it if you wish me to, if we've got time, but I was having sleep paralysis. And I don't know if you've ever had sleep paralysis, but it was kind of happening in crescendo at the time. I was attacking the church. And it was kind of, you go to sleep, you wake up, you can't move, you're stuck, you're alert, you can sort of open your eyes ajar, but you can't move at all. You're stuck in your body, you're stiff. And what was happening, it's going to sound crazy now. I was having sort of demonic visitations, for want of a better phrase, and I'll back that up with some evidence. Go to Google, type in sleep paralysis and look at Google images, and that's all I'll say. And that was going on to me at the time. And I remember going to doctors and nurses, and they're saying, look, a bit stressed out, Dave, you're a bit, have some diazepam, have some sleepers, maybe antidepressants, and this is all to do with stress. I was doing a stressful job, actually, so that did fit. Nothing worked. And I actually went to the church and my brother that he joined and said, what do I do about this? Because it seems a bit demonic to me. And they prayed with me for the first time and said, look, just pray about it. Think about Jesus. Say his name. I was like, I won't repeat exactly what I said to him, but it wasn't complimentary. Well, I thought I'd give it a whirl. So I gave it a whirl during one of these episodes of sleep paralysis, and it stopped. Like it's probably the most emotional time of my life outside of marriage and birth of kids. But the scream of whatever this thing was piercing. First time I ever got a glimpse of what it was, because it flashed across my vision for the first and stopped. Never happened since. And it was then that I realised the power in the name of Jesus Christ. And actually, that was when I purchased a Bible. In fact, I was given a Bible by that pastor of that church, and it's a massive Bible. I was quite proud to. At the start, I was very evangelical with my Christianity. Still am, given the opportunity. But I go around with my big Bible. We used to go around preaching the gospel in some of the sort of hardest places of the Midlands. And yeah, that's the story, really. So that's how I became a Christian. And ever since then, I've seen the power of prayer. I've seen the power of Jesus Christ's name. And that's from an age. If I heard myself say that 4 years ago, I'd think I'd need to probably go section or something, guess section. But I've read the scriptures, and I just read them over and over and over and over again. And it's been a while since I picked up the scriptures, so I need to get back to that. But it's wonderful that I've got a lot of prayerful support around me, not from my locality, unfortunately, but I've found that kind of personal relationship with Christ in that time, because it's not been about going to church. And I've been going to the church that was local to me, that were, I'm seeing them drop like flies, getting sick, being wheeled in wheelchairs, movement disorders, nothing mentioned, sadly, from the pulpit about this. I mean, the preaching is it's absolutely world class. But the acknowledgement of the spiritual darkness in all of this and the good v evil battle has been absent, unfortunately, specific to the COVID, wherever other pastors I've seen have spoken out. So I've detached myself from that church. And I've never heard from. I heard from the pastor. The pastor's great. He'll message me, but no one, not a brother and sister, has been in touch, and that disappoints me. They know what I'm going through. I've helped them all. The last exchange I had at my church was a lady that came up to me, tapped me on the shoulder. I said, "Oh, how are you? How's your husband?" And she went, I said, I always do this. I said, he hasn't got man flu again. She said, "Oh, you haven't heard? He's got cancer. He's got cancer. I'm really sorry to hear that." And then she said, "Just to let you know, keep doing what you're doing. Keep doing what you're doing, because what you're doing is, calling this out, and it's a good thing to do. It's a godly thing to do. And I know about 5 or 6 people in my street that have had cancers and blood clots and dropped down dead suddenly in their prime." And then she scurried off, never saw her again. And I left the church that day. And that's when my personal relationship's been growing in the last few months. I think one thing I was lacking in my Christianity was discipleship and mentorship, because I still consider, even now, it's 5 years, I became a Christian 5 years ago, I was baptized, and I still never had that kind of discipleship. I think that's the word, really. I remember going to a church once, and they said, "Oh, because you've been previously married, we're not going to allow you to stay at our church." What is that? Is that what Christians do? What about the thief on the cross I read about? Christ said to him, "Today you'll be with me in paradise," despite him being on the cross for, I don't know what he was charged with, but a crime that what warranted death. So what happened to, you can't come to our church because you were previously married? But so I've had some run-ins along the way, and I do get disappointed with what I call churchiality. Churchiality being those people that will go to church on a Sunday in their suit and feel great and sing gospel songs and praise the gospel, which is great, but you got to live it. You've got to live it, and the scriptures are very clear about that. You've got to live it. Look after your brother and sisters. Me, and sharpen each other. I forgot the exact scripture, but we sharpen each other by being together in fellowship. And so, I find it bizarre that there's not been a reach out physically. I'm only 10 minutes from most of the brothers and sisters that are from that church. Nothing.
Yeah,
I don't know.
I think
But
the way the churches have behaved during COVID has been very disappointing across all Christian denominations. So, there are standouts though, and we've certainly had some lovely priests working with us. And yes, and there are some. I mean, who else have we spoken to? We've spoken to a Jewish rabbi as well. I'm trying to remember who else we've spoken to. We've had a few. We should speak to more, but yeah, there's very few. They're thin on the ground that have spoken out.
I always get rebutted with Romans. I think I forgot where it is in Romans, where it talks about authorities and doing what the government tell you. I can't remember. I don't know if you know.
No, I think that's a misunderstanding.
Absolutely.
Really.
That's what I was about to say. There is a higher authority, unfortunately. When there are shenanigans by the government, there's a higher authority, there's God. And so it just shows a weakness. And again, my other point for Christians was that, if we have a promise, don't we? We have a promise of where we are after death, where we go, who we'll be with in paradise. And if you're scared of a coronavirus and upper respiratory tract infection on the whole for most people, and, going and rubbing your hands 50 times a day with gels and all the rest of it, there was kind of like a lack of leaning into Christ, leaning into him, leaning into your faith, and say, okay, so I die of coronavirus tomorrow, but I'll be with the Lord in paradise. So job's a good one.
Yeah. I think the litmus test was, agreeing to not go to church or to your regular Christian meetups during lockdown. So you've put the lockdown and the fear of the virus over your Christian fellowship, and that's not right.
Been shooed away as well. Shooed away at the end. It's like once the service had finished, it's like once we were back, it was like, well, you can't congregate even outdoors in the open air. You can't. There were rules such as you can take your mask off when you sing. Like, well, hang on a minute, hold it, let's go back a bit. Probably the only time you can benefit from wearing a mask is when you're singing, because you're generating droplets and saliva, etc. So you've even got that wrong. It's just bizarre. But there's yellow and black tape across the pews, and it's like a scene from an end of the world plague. And it wasn't a plague, as I mentioned. We spoke to those patients very beginning of things, and not only were there not many of them, but they were having man flu type symptoms at worst. I've never known a pandemic last for 4 years. Have you?
No, it's just.
It shows a lack of understanding of virology. Even the vaccine injured patient I spoke to yesterday, unbelievable case of, I'll try and remember it as best as I can, but she was a young woman, so shouldn't have been needing it anyway. She'd had COVID allegedly. She was quite sick. She'd had like a pneumonia type picture. Again, we can argue about, was it just an incidental lateral flow test and a bacterial pneumonia presentation? She was in for 3 weeks, I think she said. And then she was an amputee, so she had some stump surgery planned. She needed to have a stump revision. And the surgeon said to her, despite only recently recovering from COVID-19, allegedly, that she should have the COVID vaccine to be as protected as possible from COVID.
Oh,
And they refused to do the surgery unless she took the vaccine. I've got no words for that. We will not do surgery on the NHS for you unless you take this medical treatment. I had a chap even 2 weeks ago before I quit tell me he attended, for his flu vaccine and was coerced and told, we can't give you your COVID flu vaccine unless you agree to the COVID vaccine. What the heck?
so did he take both?
Yeah.
So that woman with the amputee, they said she had to have the vaccine before she could have her revision surgery. She took the vaccine as well?
She had 4, I think 3 or 4 afterwards. So, and she's ill, and she's come to, I'm going to do an interview with her. She's agreed. So I'm going to do the stroke guy, and I'm going to do an interview with these guys tomorrow. I'm putting it out there, and these are the cases that need to be highlighted now.
That's extraordinary malpractice.
What sort of doctor would give 4 COVID jabs in somebody who's naturally recovered, and she's being told it's coincidence, gaslit, told it's nothing to do with the vaccine, her decline in health since. I mean, malpractice is an understatement. These people need striking off.
Yeah.
And yet I'm going to a 15-day tribunal in October for following the principles of my Hippocratic Oath and professional code of conduct. So, and they're not even debating COVID with me. They're being really sly. They're going for the whole bullying, harassment, incitement. They've gone for, I was doing some vaccine exemptions for people to, I'll give you one example of a vaccine exemption. There's a lady who was in the UK, wanted to go to America because her daughter was really sick. She delivered a baby, first grandchild. The baby was sick in NICU, and the woman had a postpartum hemorrhage. She wanted to be with her daughter and granddaughter. She couldn't go because New York were being nasty about it, let's say. And anyway, I did a vaccine exemption, based it on the principle of informed consent, valid refusal of consent, bodily autonomy. And the second principle, the reason I put medical exemption is because, as we've discussed, I've got reason to believe these things are highly poisonous and toxic. And anyway, I've completed the medical exemption. She travelled and sent me a selfie with her daughter and granddaughter. That's the sort of demonic behaviour I've been responsible for, and they're holding that against me, filed under falsification of medical documentation for money. I've never charged for a vaccine exemption unless the patient forces me to take it, and I charge them 20 quid. 20 quid if they make me, and most of it's pro bono. Like a lot of my vaccine injury work's pro bono. So I don't know what to say, and I'm the villain.
So that vaccine exemption case will come up in that trial, that 15-day trial?
Not that particular one. It's even more sinister because 2 of the GMC complainants, who will remain nameless, out of the 3 that are holding. But apparently, I'll tell you the story really quickly, and you can cut it out if you wish. But essentially, I was contacted by a locum agency rep saying, "My name is Mark from Atlantis Medical. I'm here to place you in some surgeries in Plymouth and Torquay, which were areas near to me." We got into a conversation about that. He was fishing for information. What's your practice manager's details? Where do you live? So I can send some details out to you. And it all went a bit funny because agencies don't normally ask for that personal information on a WhatsApp. I ended the discussion there. A few days later, he contacted me and said, I'm going to America. They're still requesting 2 jabs. I heard you can do vaccine exemptions for me. I said, yeah, I can. And he said, how do you go about it? I posted my website. And he said, well, the issue I've got, Doc, is I've got no medical reasons. I said, it doesn't matter. My medical reasons of what I've just quoted, bodily autonomy, and the reason that I believe these are beyond a reasonable doubt harmful. That's a medical reason, do no harm. in your patients. Anyway, the next message I won't repeat, but it was pretty offensive, saying this man was going to buy me a caravan for when I lose my bleeping home. Now, that bit of the message was removed and sent to two of the GMC complainants, who both on the same day, 15th of September, informed the GMC that they'd been tipped off that Dr. Cartland was falsifying medical documents for money. In that exchange, I said, I'll do it for you for free. Pro bono, I said the phrase. Anyway, that's landed on my door as a backup investigation if they don't get me this time round. I never did that vaccine exemption. Never did it, because I blocked him after he was offensive and told me to sell me a caravan for when I lose my home. But that's a level of witch hunt that's going on. And surprise, surprise, and beyond all coincidences, the two GMC complainants, one being that troublemaker that I mentioned earlier, happened to come across this WhatsApp exchange on the same day, report me on the same day, and it was reported to me on the same day. And that's a coincidence. There's no coordination here. This is a complete coincidence, and I have fun in October exposing this nonsense. So.
Yes, it's a setup.
It's a setup. I mean, if the GMC deny that that's anything other than sinister,
it's a setup.
How did this anonymous? Oh, by the way, I checked that Mark from Atlantis Medical. I rang them up. I said, "Can I speak to Mark, please?" I said, "We've never had a Mark work with us for the last ever since we've been." He said, "By the way, did you say you're a GP? We don't place GPs. We're an emergency doctor placement agency. So honey trapping." And I've given this to the GMC, yet they still can't see the wood for the trees. I could give them a smoking gun at this time with bullets and fingerprints, but ballistics, they still wouldn't believe that these three people are the perpetrators, not the victims. But I've even had confirmation from the GMC this very morning that I can speak openly about this. So, and it's going to be a public tribunal anyway. So, I'm getting in first. I'm getting in first because I know what happens to my previous dissenters that get struck off. Not only do they get struck off, their faces appear on the headlines of the mainstream media as crazy, erratic, anti-vaxxers or purveyors of horse paste and all the rest of it with a picture. That affects my kids. I don't care about myself now. I've gone far enough to not care. But my children, if they get brought into this, they're creating an enemy in me. And the thing is, I'm fighting first. And I've told the GMC, I said, we can end this tomorrow. I do worry about these three complainants, how they're going to be able to, come out of this with any sort of credibility, because I've got the receipts, I've got the data, I've got the evidence for my position. For example, the obstetrician that's saying that I've incited hatred, I'm going to ask her to present me in court with the consent forms from January where she was enrolling pregnant women onto the trial. Let's assess whether this is a formal consent process. Did you tell the women that it was full of lipid nanoparticles? Did you warn them that there was some doubt about their safety? Did you tell them about the biodistribution data? Did you tell them that it crossed the placenta? Did you tell them this was a trial on humanity? Because if you don't, you're not going to walk out of that MPT with any credibility whatsoever. This is fighting talk now, because these people are threatening my career, my reputation, my children. One of the complainants is already doxed my home address. Well, not directly, but in a group he's involved in. GMC have this, where he's doxed my home address when my kids go to school, my banking, my accountancy details. They're obsessed with me. They're obsessed with me every day. I wake up to a new trial that just posts about me every day, all day, every day, 24/7. And every time the top follower is one of the three GMC complainants. It's beyond a reasonable doubt, but I've given them an opportunity. I even said I'll do an NDA to end this. I'll do an NDA. Stop it now, and I won't file any litigation. I've offered them that, and they've just come back saying, you can speak freely about it. It may affect your tribunal. Follow the protocol. We'll see you in October, essentially. They've offered me a complicated way of appealing, but it's not as if I haven't presented that data to them, that what I've just talked about in this interview. They've got the smoking guns. They've got the evidence of me being bullied by the three people accusing me. But they're ignoring it. So I don't think any appeal is going to get through this, because the cards are stacked and they want my license, and actually they can stick it. They can stick it where the sun doesn't shine now, because I don't want to work in the system. I don't need their license. I'm looking at a new future. I'm reading these sorts of books now, about diets, paleo-ketogenic diets. Yeah. I'm reading books like this, ecological medicine. I'm looking at root cause analysis, of finding out why people are ill in the first place and what you can do to prevent. Preventative medicine, naturopathic medicine, holistic medicine. So you can't do that in a GMC regulated setting in the NHS. I know colleagues who have been done for praying with their patients. And just for context, the GMC only recently have just given a 6-month suspension only to a reoffending doctor in the UK who had sex with a patient and prescribed them the morning after pill. This was in the tabloids. 6 months suspension for a reoffending. And then there was another GP the same week that was arranging rendezvous with a patient out of hours, had sex with them, 6 months suspension. I don't know how long his trial was, but there was another doctor that got drunk during an afternoon surgery, got drunk. They found the booze in a drawer, and she's been given a very short suspension and lots of TLC about the stress she was under. What about the stress of a 28-month process of accusing an innocent man of being things that I'm not? I was the bullied kid in school. I stood up for the bullied kids as well. When I learned to be a bit more street credibility, streetwise, learned karate to defend myself. And to be called a bully is insulting to my life, insulting to my upbringing, insulting to my psyche. And I may have retaliated in unwisely, but that's exactly what it was, retaliation. But it'll all come out, so of that I'm sure. So
Yeah. Well, it's interesting there's going to be a public trial. So I think we've covered just about everything. I don't know if there's anything else you wanted to add, but it's been very interesting, a lot of information, and we wish you the best actually going forward, especially for that
thank you.
trial. Thank you very much for your time.
All right, take care. Look after yourself. God bless.